Today I'll be tying a size 10 Mercer's Poxyback green drake nymph. This imitates a green drake nymph before the hatch. Mike Mercer did a terrific job developing this fly. I'll start with a Daiichi 1720 size 10 hook, and to that I've attached a 4.8 millimeter tungsten bead head. I like to wrap some wire. This is 0.25 for this size 10. 10 or 12 wraps. Trim it off with your thumbnail. Take those tags and squeeze them in, and then slide it right up behind your bead head, and that will secure your bead head next to the eye. I'm using some Danville 6/0 olive thread, and I'm going to create just a transition here right next to the lead, kind of a ramp. And then try to secure the lead with some thread wraps. And go down to the position where we'll put in the tail. This is I'll be using 3 pheasant tail fibers for the tail. Pull them off, and about half or 2/3 the length of the shank. We'll just tie it in with 3 wraps, go behind. That splays the tail, and one more wrap secures it. Some brassy copper wire. We'll tie that in. Go right back to where you attach the thread. And now for some turkey. This will be the wing case. I just use my scissors to separate the fibers. We'll pull it off. I'm going to trim part of the tail. This is the dull side and the shiny side, so I'll put the shiny side down, attach the dull side. Dull side will be up, loose wraps, and again come back to the point where you tied in the tail. Now for the gills. Fly pattern sheet calls for some olive pheasant and the undershaft from the pheasant, and you can see on each of these fibers, or each of these feathers down below is something called the undershaft feather, and these are very fragile, and I've selected one. The other option, if you don't have that, is to purchase some partridge feathers, and they will have the same undershaft feather as well. And sometimes size makes a difference. So depending upon the feather size you have, the undershaft feather will be a lot wider. So just select one that looks appropriate, and Mercer talks about putting 2 of these fibers in so that when one breaks, you still have one remaining. But if you tie these enough, I've been able to get away with just tying in one. I hope. We'll see how this goes today. Next is to put in I'm going to apply some dubbing, and I've used a combination I've blended this. This happens to be a combination of some Spirit River olive, which has got some UV properties, and some dark olive. This happens to be peacock, but it's very similar to that. Or you could use some different materials, but just an olive brown. And I'll start applying my dubbing. Take a little bit at a time, and I apply it clockwise around the thread. Go back carefully to where the tie-in point is, and then you can proceed forward. And the real nymph, green drake nymph, is a pretty stout bug, so we're going to apply quite a bit of dubbing here and make it thick. Apply this a couple of times. Go up into the thorax area, and we'll work forward and back to create a tapered, stubby body. I think it takes the longest to tie this fly is to apply all the dubbing. And we'll end right about the 50% mark. We'll cut off some of the longer fibers, and then carefully just fold this undershaft forward. And I'll just hold this on top with my thumb and carefully place it. I've got 3 wraps that will hold that in place. We'll trim the butt end. Make sure that's on top. Then I'll pull the wing case forward. We'll start to make that. Notice that I've got a wide wing case. And I'll apply some more wraps directly over the top, secure that. That's 1, 2, 3. There's 5 wraps. Now I'll take my wire for the ribbing, and if you just bring this forward, it'll bind those fibers down. So I'd like to take a bodkin and kind of open it up just a little bit. I try not to trap too many feathers or too many of those undershaft fibers down, because these are the gills, to imitate the gills of the natural. And we'll just continue up. If you move your wire back and forth, it will kind of go through those fibers as well. And I'll end right at my tie-off point with a couple of wraps. And I'll helicopter the wire off and pull the wing case back. We're going to keep that. You can tell I've got my body made. We'll move into the thorax area with some additional dubbing, the same dubbing that I had for the body. And we'll wind it on. So go back, make sure the wing case as you pull it forward isn't going to, that is far enough back to create that extended wing case. I'll move up behind the bead, fill some of that in and come back. Again, moving back and forth with your dubbing. This is a good fly to practice your dubbing technique. And we'll end right at the bead. Next step is to create the legs. I'm taking just a hen patch. I'll take one of these feathers off. Open up the fibers a little bit. And I'll trim that off to create the legs. We'll bring a few fibers forward. And tie it in right behind the bead and hold the fibers down along the thorax edge. Take a couple of wraps, pull that up, and then just to center it, pull the thread tight. And I'll place one thread wrap in front. Hopefully that will bind it down. Trim the remaining. And you can use this then to create your next fly. You can get a couple legs out off of each one. We'll trim these fibers. And then holding the fibers down, we'll move that wing case forward, holding it tight. Take a couple of wraps, and then if you need to, you can take the remaining parts of your turkey and spread it out so that the thorax is a little bit wider. Otherwise, sometimes it gets just too narrow on the back. Take some securing wraps and trim the remaining. Now we can just do a quick whip finish. And we'll apply, Mike Mercer put on some epoxy. That was before the days when UV resin was being utilized so much in fly time. And I've incorporated UV resin into this. Here's my tube of Solarez UV resin. We're going to put a drop on the top. This will take a couple of coats. It will kind of soak into the turkey. I like to put a couple on, use my UV torch. I'm a counter, so I count up to about 20, 25. And that's hard. And now I'll put another coat over the top of that. A bit thicker up onto the bead. If you need to, you can take your bodkin and move it around, but I was able to put it where I needed it, and so I'll just set the UV resin. Are you counting with me? I like to set that. I might have it on there longer than I need to, but I want to make sure that that is nice and hard and set. And there's your Mercer's Poxyback Green Drake Nymph, substituting UV resin for the epoxy of the natural. At times, if you've got some of the gills that are too long, you can always take your thumbnail and tear those off a little bit to size, but I don't think it makes a lot of difference. There you go. I'll have the recipe down below. You can find it on my website, RiverKeeper Flies, johnkreft.com. And if you like this, be sure to click like down below.